All right, well, we have been blessed with another beautiful day in Florida. It was pretty hot yesterday. I really thought our nice days had come to an end and that was behind us, but we've got a nice day out. Look at how blue the sky is. Ah, I love it. I love it. I wish I was doing something outside. I mean, I'm doing something outside, but doing something outdoorsy. I don't know if that makes sense. So, we had kind of like a mini vacation from working on the cars. We went and did some tire testing, drifting, which was really fun.
Dancing through the streets, we wander, falling for the fire. Burning at the heart, throwing hands up to the sky. Ooh, we live for the night.
We did the manual swap, like how-to video on the NB that Ben has, but now we have pretty much everything together to get back to work, and we have a lot of work to do, but like everything's stacked up and ready to go, which is super exciting. So we've got our nice line. If you guys remember the AN line fiasco, which is what brought on our vacation from the car. So we got nice Fragola line. I got my last 120 fitting in that I ordered from Chris Jackson, and this is kind of interesting because we had that discussion, that video about like not why you shouldn't buy cheap eBay stuff. Well, these are Fragola fittings and they're like name brand expensive fittings. Look at how in the bend it crushes down. It's like basically they made a 90 and then bent it more, and it causes this crush bend and this tighter inside radius. This is a cheaper fitting, still nice, but cheaper, and it maintains that inside diameter all the way through. So this, in my eyes, is a better fitting than this more expensive one. So and that's the other side of that, like cheaper parts being better than more expensive parts. A lot of you guys commented that you did want to see a video like that, like going over kind of eBay parts, cheap parts versus expensive parts, where it's kind of the same, where it's way different, you know, how it all works, which I've learned from working in the automotive industry, how a lot of it works. And then there's still a lot of trial by fire, but we'll go over that in that video. But I'm excited to make that video. That'll be a good video. So anyway, we have a lot of stuff in for the Miata. We got a resonator because the thing's too loud, so I want to get that on today. We got V-bands for it, so we'll be able to swap between straight pipe and resonator if we don't like it. Oil temp sensor, because we'll need to know the oil temp with the dry sump and whatnot. Some other stuff. But more importantly, more excitingly, we have more of our Mishimoto stuff came in. We got a bunch of this stuff the other day. The rest of our Mishimoto stuff came in today. So that's super exciting. We are stacked with Mishimoto stuff, got tons of stuff to throw on the car. That'll make it a lot more reliable and better. We've also got our harness in, which is another big thing. It took me forever to find the harness needed, but once I got it to them, they knocked this thing out in like a week. So super awesome. Huge shout out to iWire. They got that done so quickly. So we're gonna be able to start back on that very soon. I mean, we've got a couple more projects to do with the Miata. Ideally, we'll finish the Miata, start on the Subaru, you know, within the next few days. I don't know. We might, if we hit any more delays, then I'll probably start on the Subaru while we're waiting for whatever we need for the Miata. But very exciting. Like I said, we are kind of stacked with projects and parts and things to do, which is sick because it's a lot better than not having parts but needing to do stuff or what. I'd rather be busy than bored. So today, like I said, we're waiting on those last few fittings. They might be here today, but first, before we get there, since we're waiting on that, I want to start on some underneath projects. So let's get this thing up in the air and I'll show you guys what we're gonna work on first. Sandy's enjoying the weather, isn't that right, Sands? You got pollen all over you, dude. This is why we call you Sandy. Look at how dirty she is. She does this thing where she meows at the door to go outside, goes out, and then realizes that it's freezing outside, or cold, and then she comes back inside, and then 10 minutes later, she forgets that it's cold outside and wants to go back outside. Ben suggested we get her an iPhone with the weather app so she could check the weather before she meows to go outside, but I don't know that she'd care. Okay, so we have two important fabrication projects to do under here. Thing number one, make a plate to cover this. A lot of you commented about it. I kept forgetting to mention that it was on the to-do list, but it is, and we're doing it today. So we're gonna make a plate that covers basically this whole opening, and we'll have it probably, I don't know, maybe bolt in here with this bolt. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll figure out a way to mount it. It'll go through these bolts for sure, these bolt holes, and then cover that up. I do also wanna make a skid plate, basically going the route of this whole subframe. Maybe even up to here, I don't know, but at least for starters around here, just to protect the fittings and things like that. So those two are on the to-do list. I don't know if we'll get to the skid plate today. The other big thing on the fab to-do list is putting that resonator in. So I'm gonna put it in this section of exhaust. So like I said, I'm gonna cut it, weld it in, weld the V-bands in, and then I'll get another set of V-band flanges, and then I'll weld those to the straight pipe section so I can switch it out. And if I want it even quieter, I can do the same thing, find the same dimension muffler, put V-bands on it, and be able to change it out. So we'll be able to have like 3 different exhaust tones with just 2 V-bands to switch between them. So obviously first plan of action is just getting the resonator in. So what should we tackle first? I think the welder is already set up for aluminum. I think I have my 8 cup on and all that stuff. So I guess we'll do the aluminum project first. So we'll start making a template for this so we can figure out what shape we need to cut out of the aluminum. Well, it's definitely not the prettiest thing I've ever made, but fits in there solid. It does the job. Covers the flywheel. Don't have to worry about rock and stuff getting in there and bouncing around. So we are covered. See what I did there? So the next thing I want to do is start working on the skid plate. Looking at it, it's going to be a little difficult because I want to run it back to at least here. Realistically, probably back to these bolts. I don't know that I can go that far. But the exhaust hangs down a little below the subframe. I'm going to be mounting it to the subframe. So I'll probably have to build like a leg and then a leg, like weld basically extensions on to kind of slope it down to tuck under this. I don't know. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm going to go ahead and cut the square out and mock it up and just kind of figure out what I need to do to make it fit. But at least we've got solid mounting surfaces to mount to. I mean, I think that would be definitely worthwhile to have a nice skid plate under here to protect all this stuff. So see what we can figure out. Why not? So that part was easy. I didn't have to weld anything or do it the way I thought I was going to need to do it. So gives me some extra time to make the skid plate. All right, so I think my plan of action for this, I'm like kind of unhappy with it because it slopes down because it touches the exhaust, but in the grand scheme of things, I'd rather bash that into stuff than bash the exhaust or the front of the bell housing or anything like that into stuff. So I was able to figure out a method to clamp it. I got found these C-clamps and they hold it pretty good. It was really tough to try to hold it up by hand and like mark these cuts. That's why this one's kind of goofy and this one's actually like solid. So anyway, well, what I need to do is build a couple brackets off the back here. I'm going to trim like a 1/4 inch off of it and then build basically an L bracket to bolt in there. And then we will drill and riv nut the front here. So I'm going to pull it off, make those brackets. I've got like the position marked. I know how long they need to be. So we're going to do all that, get it back up, get it bolted in, and then we should be able to run through and drill and then riv nut, and then we'll be done with this and we can move on to the dry sump lines if our fittings get here today, which they should be here today. So fingers crossed. If not, we got the resonator to work on, but I'm gonna hold off on the resonator. If we have the lines, I wanna get the lines done first because then we can start the car up, and that's more important to me than getting the resonator in. And that'll allow us to do a sound test of like before and after the resonator. So that's my tentative plan. I probably shouldn't even tell you guys this because it never goes to plan if I tell you the plan, but we're gonna hope that it goes to plan. All right, anyway, let's pull this thing off, get back to work. So what I'm doing here is just going down the plate. I'm marking at a 1/2 inch so I can draw a straight line to cut with. I just use a circular saw with a carbide tip wood blade for aluminum. It's soft enough to do that. Doesn't equal the greatest, smoothest cut, but it works. So now we're moving on to the legs. So I'm making these little L brackets that I'm gonna use to bolt the back of the subframe. So I'm cutting all the pieces out for those. So I cut the L part and then I get everything ready to cut the angles. So I'm going to use these little angle brackets pieces to brace that L bracket so that can't get crushed in. So now I'm getting ready to weld everything up. The hardest part of welding little brackets like this is just tacking them. There's no good way to hold them in place while you tack them. So something that's hard about tacking stuff is when you're TIG welding, you need one hand for the torch, one hand for the rod. But when you're trying to hold some little piece and tack it, you don't have your rod hand. So there's no way to add rod while you're holding the piece and holding the torch. So what I've found that seems to work well is I'll weld a little puddle of rod in a couple spots, as you can see on the right, and then I'll hold the piece up, melt that puddle, and that'll be basically my tack. It'll be like I'm adding rod, but it's already there, if that makes sense. So with the hardest part of tacking them out of the way, it's just welding them out, which went pretty smoothly. The hardest part was these angle brackets, just because it was kind of a tight space and kind of tough to get in there. But all in all, came out decent, should be pretty solid and work well. All right, we got our legs welded on. Not the prettiest things ever, but the fit up was meh. But regardless, they are on, they're welded. They should be stout, so we're letting everything cool down a little bit, and then we're going to mock it up, see where we need to drill the holes. Once we drill the holes, we can bolt the back end and then clamp the front, drill the holes for the front so that everything's lined up good. Throw some rib nuts in, bolt it in, move on. All right, skid plate is done, all mounted up. We've got about a 1/4 inch of clearance. Let's see if I can show you guys. Come on. Here, let's try back here. Oh, this is gonna be hard to see. Yeah, see, there's like a 1/4 inch of clearance between it and the face of the bell housing, so it shouldn't rattle against it. Maybe not even a 1/4 inch, like an 1/8 inch. But it should be solid, shouldn't rattle against it. I brace these so that when it does slam into the ground, which is inevitable, it won't just crush in. So it should be pretty solid. Like I said, it's kind of goofy it hanging down like that in the back because it has to. But, you know, I'd rather hit this on stuff than hit everything else. So should work out fine. I did 3 bolts. I thought about adding a couple here, but I feel like it's just gonna make it want to rattle more because it'll push the edges closer up. Yeah, so we'll see how it does, but it's done at least. We can move on. Run down to the mailbox, hope our fittings are here so we can make our lines, put oil in it, and start that thing up. Hyped, hyped. But I'm nervous because I'm assuming something's gonna go wrong, but I'm hyped.
Dancing through the streets, we wander, falling for the fire. Burning at the heart, throwing hands up to the sky. Ooh, we live for the night. Ooh, here for the ride. I feel alive under the city lights.
All right, well, the fittings were not in the mailbox, unfortunately, so I'm hoping they show up a little later today. That would be ideal. So for now, we can start on doing the exhaust. So we're gonna add the resonator in. So we'll pull this whole section out, basically from there, all the way over there, chop it, V-bands, resonator, etc. Well, I went ahead and added 2 more bolts to the skid plate just because it was bothering me and it seemed jank having the 3 only and having the sides kind of hanging down. And I realized my reasoning for not putting the side bolts in was out of laziness and just me trying to make an excuse to not do it because I didn't want to have to drill more holes and take it back off and whatever, but really wasn't that bad. It took like 5 minutes. I'm glad I did it. I feel better now. So we have our resonator here. I meant to grab the V-bands before I started filming this clip. I'm hoping there's enough room. I got a big one because it needs to be quieted down a decent bit. So yeah, I'm just hoping there's enough room between the exhaust and the diff. It looked like there would be, but we won't know really until we do it. So yeah, let's get to welding. All right, so the first step is to get everything ready to weld. The TIG torch is currently set up for aluminum, so it has a smaller number 8 cup and a pretty rounded tungsten. So I'm switching to a big number 12 cup, which is great for stainless, good gas coverage, long stick out. And I resharpened the tungsten. So now it's time to clean everything up. So we're just using a grinder. You want to get the shiny bright metal when you're TIG welding, especially with stainless. So we cleaned up the resonator. Now we're cleaning up the welding surface of the V-bands themselves. Then we just wipe everything down with denatured alcohol so it is super clean. The cleaner the better, the easier it's going to be to weld. So now our job is to tack it without moving it, which is kind of tough. I'm adding a tack pretty much every inch or so. That way when it's time to start welding it, when you get that weld going on the first side, it doesn't warp it and pull up the other side and create this big gap and make it crooked and all that stuff. So it's really important with stuff like this to have a lot of tack. So now I'm trying to basically adjust the V-bands to hold it in place. It doesn't work very well. That's probably the hardest part of welding this. The position wasn't that bad. It's not that hard to weld around something when you can rotate it, but it just kept wanting to slide on me. You can see a few times where like it slides out as I'm welding, and you can see me struggling there trying to get it in the right position. I try to use the V-band again. It works a little bit, but it would take too long to switch it every time I needed to rotate it a little bit. So we just kind of fought it out and made it work. For the first weld out the gate, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. I kept having issues with it wanting to wobble around on me. I mean, all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. It's got nice color. It's pretty uniform. Not pro welding by any means, but not bad. So this is our other tack side, which we'll be welding up in a second. I'm just waiting for this to cool down because the way I'm welding it, my arm is basically resting on this one. So when we flip it around, it'd be resting on this one, which is very hot. So we're gonna wait a minute, let it cool off, and then weld this side. So this side's pretty much the same thing as the other side. We have a little bit better plan now of how to hold it, and we have our practice from the first joint. It's kind of one of those things with TIG welding where you kind of have to warm up. So I guess it would be good to warm up on something, but you know, this is all stuff for myself. So if it doesn't come out perfect, it's not a big deal to me. I try to make it nice, but if it's not, it's not a big deal. All right, well, that side came out much nicer. I was doing a little better at keeping the size and everything consistent and the gaps and all that stuff. It just looks way, way, way better than the other side. It's usually how it goes though. The first one's never super nice. It's just kind of tough because you want to get enough heat in it where it's going to penetrate well, but if you get too much heat, it starts just kind of flowing everywhere, and especially with stainless. Stainless is very heat sensitive. So like, for example, if you're welding steel at 100 amps, the same thickness stainless, you'd weld at 70 amps, roundabouts. So it's really sensitive to heat. So you'll get on it and it'll just start like wanting to melt away. So you gotta be Johnny on the spot with it. But I'm really happy with that. I just gotta orient it where my welds from both sides that look good are on the bottom. Okay, so next part's probably gonna be a good bit trickier. Welding the other side of the flange onto the exhaust itself. So we gotta make sure we cut it right, but then also we gotta try to tack the flange on there without doing it crooked. We can't do this method where we clamp it to make sure it doesn't get out of whack, because it would be really, I mean, maybe when we tack it, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Probably end up like cutting it, clamping it in the vise, and then setting it on there and tacking it. Something along those lines. Doesn't have to be perfect, as with everything on this project. All right, so this was definitely super tricky. Trying to get a straight cut with such a big piece, there's no way to hold it like guaranteed straight. So then I clamp it in the vise, clean it up, and try to get the V-band on there, which is a little tough because the V-band was bigger than the pipe itself, so it wanted to sit down. So I had to like tack it and move it and check it and tack it and move it and check it. But I got it all lined up and tacked it all up. I will say what separates the hobbyists like me from like the real welders is welding out of position. This is hard, like standing up, trying to like lean upside down and come in with a super weird rod angle, and oh man, it is tough. That's where the real professional welders really shine, I guess, if that makes sense. So I just clamp everything together to make sure it all fits up tight. All right, we got the flanges tacked up. Went pretty well. I've got them bolted to the resonator, or clamped to the resonator. So what I'm gonna do is weld like a strip, a strip, a strip, just basically like a short strip all the way around. And then I'll pop the clamps off and then weld the rest of the way around without it connected, because it's gonna be a lot harder to get to everything with it connected, but it'll keep it straight and true and prevent us from having, you know, the issue of it warping or whatever and not wanting to seal. So we'll at least get like 4 corners welded before we unclamp it. So yeah, definitely gonna be a little tricky. Probably won't come out as nice as that because that was a lot easier to get to, but you know, it is what it is. We're making progress, almost done. So yeah, this definitely was about as tricky as I expected. More out of position stuff. As you can see, I'm like leaning all the way over here trying to weld, like backhanded. And then when you have something super long attached like that, it's really tricky to position it. Like here I've got it leaned up against my shoulder and like reaching around it trying to do it. So we get the 4 welds on that one, take it off so it's easier to get to this one, which wasn't anywhere near as bad. Still some weird spots like this, but it really wasn't too bad. So I decided I did my 4 corner welds basically, and then I realized like I can kind of get to everything. So I just left it clamped on to make sure it stays true while I welded out the rest of it. So yeah, a couple weird spots like this, but all in all really was not that hard to weld this one out all the way. I don't know what it is about welding time lapses that's so satisfying, but they just are. So yeah, this part was definitely the trickiest part. As I said before, you have that really long section and it really limits like how you can orient it to get to the weld. So you got it clamped to the table so it's not falling over because there's no way to hold it upright. And I end up having to sharpen the tungsten because it's getting a little dull, but this side, really not bad. The next side is probably the hardest one, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't that bad. It was easier than expected. As you can see, I'm pretty hyped on it. All right, the last part is welded. The weld actually came out really nice on this one too. It came out better on this than on the resonator, which was a much easier weld to get to everything. I think it's the material. This is like nice, vibrant material. That resonator is like a cheap eBay resonator, so that could be part of it, but I'm really, really happy with how it came out. It's funny, I'll go from welding steel to aluminum and be like, yeah, aluminum's pretty easy. Like, it's really not hard at all. It's easier than steel. And then I'll go back to steel and be like, wait, no, just kidding. Steel is way easier. It's kind of like easier to be precise and tell like where you're making mistakes, where you're adding too much rod, too little rod, too much heat, too little heat. Whereas with aluminum, it's just kind of like you just start going and you just go and you get it done. And it's easy to make aluminum look decent. It's easier to make aluminum look decent than it is steel. But it's a lot easier to make steel look really good than it is to make aluminum look really good. Like, I don't even understand how people do that, where it's like these perfectly defined dimes with no weirdness with aluminum. It's tough. All right, I made some lunch, and then we will let this cool down, and then we'll put it on. All right, guys, the exhaust is done. Everything fits as it should, as it did. Resonator clears. There's no interference anywhere. It's kind of nice having these 2 V-bands because I can rotate the tip up, which will bring this down because of where the hanging point is. I can bring it up if I need to, if this gets in the way of something. All in all, really happy with how it came out. Really curious to see how it sounds, which has me extra motivated to get the car started, which I did want to do today. I wanted to get the feed and return lines done today, but my fittings literally just came in like 5 minutes ago. I just rode to the mailbox and got them because Al let me know the mail came, and it's 5:30. And that normally wouldn't be a problem. We could work for another few hours to get it done. It would just be dark. But tonight is league night, which I'm bummed because I wanted to get this done today. But I'm hyped because I love league night. League night's a blast. Cleetus is coming again, so that'll be really cool. I think I'm like somewhere in towards the top of like the championship points because you get points every race. So if I finish well for the next couple or whatever, I might podium, which I think I win some money or something. I don't know. I don't really care about that. I just do it for fun, you know, but it's kind of cool to actually be in contention, I think, or potentially be in contention. I don't know. Regardless, I got to go ship out some stuff, order some more parts, and I will see you guys at league night. It's time, I qualified 3rd. Cleetus is 6th, right?
Number 6, Taylor Ray to the front. Taylor Ray.
So this race was pretty wild. You can see we have a lot of people. We have almost 20 people. Normally they split it into 2 groups, but this time it was 1 group. I'm trying to fist bump Ben. He wasn't having it. But yeah, so it's a rolling start. Whoever finishes, whatever position you finish, you finish. I mean, it's just a race to the finish. So it definitely gets really wild, this particular race. So I'm just going to give you guys a cliff note to this race. Coming into basically one of the first turns, I get bumped from the back, I think by Ben. This guy gets past me in the number 1 cart, so I tuck in behind Ben. I try to take a run on him in the next turn. I end up bumping him and sending him pretty wide, which gets me past. I feel bad. I didn't really mean to do that, but it happened. So now I'm trying to catch up to the number 1 cart. So I catch up to him, and that number 1 cart is fast in a straight line. I had it the next race and was able to do really well with it. And my cart handled okay, but it just did not have any top speed. You can see he just pulls away from me on the straights, which was more fun because I was having to work in the turns to catch him, but I catch him so hard sometimes that it ended up slowing me down a bunch. So this time I get a run next to him, and I'm like, all right, we're side by side. We're going into the turn. He's got the inside line for the next turn. I stay all the way to the edge to give him room. He goes in, I go under, try to get past him again. I end up next to him. He's got a little more speed than me. We're side by side, but then he just forces me off into the tires. He doesn't give me any room to get by, which slows me down a ton. So as we come through this chicane, I don't even realize it, but Matt is catching up hardcore. So as we go into this turn, Matt squeaks by me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I lost another position trying to get a position. And so I'm like, you know what, let's run together. I'll run with you, and we'll catch up and pass this guy. So this is probably the most fun part of the race. We're literally like bumper to bumper, pushing each other around the track for a solid couple laps. But I just don't, my cart doesn't quite have the juice to get past either of them. So I'm just tucked in behind, hoping we'll get an opportunity to just squeak past together by drafting each other. So same situation here, I keep getting pulled on the straights. Matt gets a good opportunity to go by and gets by. I do not have the speed to get by, so I tuck back in behind. So same thing happens here. I catch him super hard, I end up bumping him. I come on the inside, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try to get it. I got speed. And he just forces me off into the grass again. So I tuck back behind him again, try to plot my next passing move. So that passing move actually comes in this next turn. I'm just running him down with speed. So we come in here, I actually bump him a little bit, I think, which pushes him wide. I end up next to him, same thing again. Doesn't give me any room. I was gonna go into the tires, but I didn't let him by. And then I get passed again, and I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, I've lost 2 positions now trying to pass. So this is the last lap. The one cart gets bumped. This guy goes on the inside of him. I go on the inside of him. We're running side by side. I try to under over him, and it just doesn't work out. I didn't have the speed. So I tuck in behind him and end up in 4th for the last lap and end up finishing 4th, which in the grand scheme of things, not too bad. So the second race qualifying is determined by your best time in the previous race, which just happened to be 4th again. So going into this first turn, I know that I'm probably not going to get a run on Jason. He's to my right. He's fast. So I get kind of caught up back here. I've got another guy like right on my tail trying to get past me. So we come into this turn, which is a really tricky turn because it's kind of like a left and a right. And I get caught up behind the number 10 cart. I get bumped off into the rumble strips, and I'm like, dang, like that kind of sucks. Like get bumped off and then get taken on the inside, which this guy's a clean racer, so I know he didn't mean to do it, but I was just like, crap. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to try to pass him right back and not give him any time to pull away. So I come in here, and then we end up side by side going into this next turn, which is obviously he's on the inside, so now he's got the advantage. So I tuck back in behind him here. I'm like, man, I really need to get past this guy. I can see the front of the group's pulling away. I need to get past both these guys. I'm in the number 1 cart. I know it's fast, so I don't know what he does here. He just goes wide. I get by, and then my next goal is to catch the next guy and then catch up to the front. So I have a huge speed advantage in this cart. As you can see, I just catch him so quick. So we come into this turn. I go to try to take him on the inside. He sees me, and he's also a clean racer, so he lets me by because he knows I have more speed than him, and the cart's just faster. So he lets me by, fortunately, and now my job is to catch up to at least 2nd place. So it took me a bit, but I caught up to Jason. He's a really fast driver. He was just definitely in a slow cart, and I was in a fast cart. Matt in the lead is also in a fast cart. So he starts running a defensive line. He's kind of running mid-line, so I can't take him on the inside. I use this to my advantage, though. I'll go on the outside, force him to run an inside line into the corner, and I try to go under him, basically. So it's going to force him wide. I come on the inside. I don't have quite the run, but I do the same thing here, force him on the inside, and then I squeak by. I get next to him. I look over. I'm checking. I'm giving him room to come by. I check, make sure he's there. And then I know I'm clear to turn into this turn. I'm not going to hit him. So now I want to try to catch Matt, but I don't end up catching him. He's also in a fast cart. He was running a little faster per lap than me, so we stay pretty much the same distance through the rest of the race. We end up lapping a couple people, but other than that, nothing really interesting happens in the rest of the race. I pull away, but I don't catch up.
Oh, my lap time was 51.9.
Hold on, I gotta scroll up, Taylor.
Oh,
there you are.
50.
49.9, Taylor, you crushed it.
Wait a second. Cooper, was that you I passed at the end?
I'm trying to let you by.
Yeah. Okay. I couldn't tell if it was you or somebody else. 2nd place. But look, Matt. Oh, you already scrolled down. Matt is like still half a second faster than me with a 49.
Oh yeah. Well, I knew when he got that cart.
Yeah. No, that was crazy.
You weren't going to catch him.
Oh, that's the good
That's
cart.
the one that I qualified.
Number
second.
1 is good too.
Yeah,
though.
and I knew once he got that cart.
Yeah.
He
No,
was
that's
gone
what you
because
said. He was.
I qualified second in it, and Matt.
He rolled out.
He rolled out.